Christmas dinner was supposed to be one of those rare nights where my family pretended everything was fine. The table was set with golden plates, the smell of roasted turkey filled the house, and soft carols played in the background like some cliché holiday movie. But beneath the fake smiles and forced laughter, I could feel the tension pulsing in the air, sharp and invisible, like walking barefoot over broken glass. My sister, Claire, had always known how to draw the spotlight, and tonight was no different. She twirled her wine glass, smirking across the table at me with that familiar gleam in her eyes, the one that promised trouble. I tried to ignore her, to focus on the cranberry sauce and the flickering candles, but my chest tightened with every second she held that grin. Then, in a blur faster than my brain could process, she slammed the neck of her bottle against my mouth. A piercing crack echoed louder than the music, and my world collapsed into pain and shock. The metallic taste of blood mixed with wine dripped down my chin as gasps erupted around me. My father shouted her name, my mother froze with her fork midair, and I just sat there, teeth shattered, my body trembling, but paralyzed. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. Instead, she stood tall, raised her glass high above her head, and with the calmest voice I've ever heard, she made a toast. "To family," she said, smiling at the fragments of me she had left scattered across the table. That was the exact moment I realized Christmas would never again mean warmth, forgiveness, or home. It would only mean blood, silence, and a toast I would never forget. I know stories like this sound unbelievable, almost like some twisted screenplay, but I promise you, every detail I'm about to share is true. That Christmas dinner wasn't just a family gathering gone wrong. It was the night that stripped away the last illusion I had about love, loyalty, and forgiveness. Until that evening, I kept telling myself that family meant protection, no matter how many arguments or scars lived beneath the surface. But the second the glass exploded against my teeth, I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to shield you are the same ones who break you apart. This isn't just about violence at a holiday table. It's about the years of resentment, jealousy, and secrets that built up like cracks in the walls of our house, invisible to outsiders, but always ready to collapse with the slightest pressure. When Claire raised her glass and toasted to family, she wasn't celebrating us. She was mocking me, mocking the very idea that blood ties could hold us together. And maybe the cruelest part is that everyone else let her. They stayed seated. They stayed silent. That silence still echoes louder than the shattering bottle. In this video, I'm going to take you step by step through what happened that night, the hidden truths that led us there, and what it really means to survive betrayal by someone you once loved like a piece of your own soul. So stay with me until the end, because the story doesn't just unravel what happened at that dinner. It reveals the secret my sister exposed with her cruel toast, a secret none of us were ever meant to hear. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to uncover will stay with you long after this video ends. The hours before Christmas dinner were always the worst. While most families busied themselves with laughter and warmth, mine revolved around walking on eggshells. I could feel it the moment I stepped through the front door of my parents' house that evening. The heavy silence beneath the soft Christmas music, the careful choreography of forced greetings, and the way everyone's smiles looked like masks glued too tightly. My mom kissed my cheek, her lipstick leaving a faint mark, but her eyes darted nervously toward the kitchen where Claire was already pouring herself another drink. I had promised myself I wouldn't let her get under my skin this year. I was 25, not a child anymore, and I swore I wouldn't let her games ruin me. Still, my hands trembled as I set down the gifts I'd brought, knowing deep inside that it was only a matter of time before the night spiraled out of control. Dinner prep was supposed to bring people together, but in our house, it was the prelude to battle. My father barked orders from the dining room, adjusting the chairs like a general readying his troops, while my mom scurried between dishes, her face pale with the pressure to make everything perfect. Claire leaned against the counter, swirling her wine glass and smirking at me as though daring me to speak. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence carried an entire history of rivalry, bitterness, and unspoken accusations. Every time her eyes met mine, it felt like she was peeling back layers of me, searching for something to tear apart. I looked away, pretending to care about the mashed potatoes, but I could feel her smirk burning into the back of my skull. It wasn't always like this. There were Christmases when Claire and I sat side by side, our matching pajamas glowing in the light of the tree, giggling over the rustling of wrapping paper and sneaking cookies before bed. But as we grew older, something between us cracked. Maybe it was jealousy, maybe competition, or maybe just the simple cruelty of siblings who know exactly where to hurt each other most. She always found a way to make me feel small, whether by mocking my clothes, dismissing my achievements, or twisting my words into weapons. And yet, every year, I kept coming back, hoping that maybe this Christmas would be different. Hope has a way of disguising itself as duty, convincing you that if you just endure a little longer, things will change. But with Claire, change only meant escalation. As the table filled with food, the atmosphere thickened. My mom kept pushing us to sit, desperate to get everyone in their places, as if the arrangement of silverware could dictate the outcome of the night. My father cleared his throat over and over, trying to assert some kind of control, but his voice sounded smaller with every attempt. Claire raised her glass before anyone had even sat down, her eyes glinting with mischief. "To another perfect family Christmas," she said, her words dripping with sarcasm. My parents chuckled weakly, but I knew they were terrified of igniting her temper. I forced a smile, my jaw aching from the effort, and told myself to stay quiet, to avoid confrontation, because peace was fragile and fleeting in our house. But silence is its own kind of fuel. Every word unsaid, every secret shoved into a corner, every look exchanged like a blade, all of it built a fire that could only end in flames. As we began to eat, Claire picked at her food with exaggerated disgust, making little comments just loud enough for me to hear. "Some people never grow out of being pathetic," she muttered, staring directly at me before sipping her wine. My mother froze, pretending she hadn't heard. My father's fork scraped against his plate in a desperate rhythm. And me? I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood. I wish I could tell you I stood up for myself, that I looked her in the eye and told her to stop. But the truth is, I had learned over years of humiliation that silence was safer. Speaking only gave her ammunition. So I smiled tightly, swallowed my pride, and let her continue. The problem is, predators thrive on silence. The more you let them push, the further they go. Claire's comments grew sharper, her laughter louder, her gaze more venomous. I could feel the moment she decided she wanted a scene, like a storm cloud gathering strength before unleashing chaos. The wine didn't help. With every sip, Claire's voice grew bolder, her movements less restrained. She leaned across the table, brushing too close to me, whispering words only I could hear. "You don't belong here," she hissed, her breath heavy with alcohol. My chest tightened, my fork trembling in my hand. Nobody else seemed to notice, or maybe they just pretended not to. That was the way in our family. Deny, avoid, pretend. And that pretending only made me feel more isolated, as though I was trapped in a nightmare no one else could see. When the bottle finally connected with my face, it felt less like an accident and more like destiny. Claire's arm moved with terrifying precision, the glass shattering against my mouth with a sound I'll never forget. Pain exploded through me. My vision blurred, and the room filled with a silence so deep it swallowed the music. My mother gasped, dropping her fork. My father shouted her name, his voice breaking. And me? I sat frozen, my hands pressed to my bleeding mouth, staring at the shards of myself scattered across the tablecloth. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But shock has a way of chaining you in place. As the warmth of blood trickled down my chin, I looked around the table and saw not outrage, not anger, not even concern, just paralysis. Everyone sat still, their faces pale, their mouths slightly open, as though waiting for someone else to act. And then Claire stood, calm as ever, lifting her glass high like the queen of some grotesque ceremony. "To family," she said, her voice steady and almost sweet. It was as if she hadn't just shattered me, as if the blood dripping from my lips was nothing more than spilled wine on a tablecloth. That was the moment something inside me broke in a way no doctor could fix. Teeth can be repaired, cuts can be stitched, but trust is fragile glass, and once shattered, the pieces never fit the same again. The toast wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was a declaration. She had won. She had silenced me, not just with violence, but with the complicity of everyone who stayed seated, who let the toast ring louder than my pain. I realized then that the real story of that night wasn't about a bottle or even broken teeth. It was about the silence that followed and the secret that silence was hiding, a secret I would only discover once the night dragged deeper into chaos. The blood on my lips that night wasn't the first wound Claire had left on me. It was only the most visible. Long before glass cut into my skin, her words had already carved scars that no one could see. Growing up with her was like sharing a house with both a mirror and a shadow. We were close enough in age to compete for everything: attention, approval, love, but different enough that my victories always felt like her losses. If I brought home good grades, she'd roll her eyes and tell me I was trying too hard. If I made a new friend, she'd find a way to turn them against me. And still, I kept chasing her acknowledgement, like a child begging for warmth from a fire that only burns. Some nights, I'd hear her laughing in her room, surrounded by people who adored her, while I sat alone with my books, pretending not to care. But I did care. I cared so much it ate me alive. Claire had a way of making every space belong to her, of sucking the air out of the room until I was left gasping, invisible. She didn't just want to be seen. She wanted me not to exist. And my parents, maybe too tired or too blind, never stopped her. To them, her cruelty looked like confidence, and my silence looked like weakness. They mistook survival for peace. Holidays only magnified the cracks. At Thanksgiving, she once accidentally spilled gravy over my dress, smirking as everyone laughed it off. On my 17th birthday, she made a cruel joke in front of my friends that left me crying in the bathroom while she soaked in the spotlight. I told myself these were just moments, just sibling rivalry, the kind of stories people laugh about years later. But they weren't. They were patterns, rehearsals for the performance she perfected that Christmas night. The truth is, Claire's toast wasn't born out of nowhere. It was the grand finale of a show she had been directing for years. I often wonder why I never fought back. Maybe I believed that love meant enduring. Maybe I thought that if I just proved myself worthy enough, she'd finally stop seeing me as her rival and start seeing me as her sister again. But love warped by fear is not love at all. It's submission. Claire sensed it, and she thrived on it. She needed someone beneath her to feel tall, and I was the perfect target. Sensitive, desperate to please, always shrinking when she expanded. That night at the Christmas table, she knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew exactly how powerless I felt to stop her. The silence of my parents still haunts me more than the pain of the bottle. I looked at them through blurred vision, waiting, begging for someone to rise, to protect me, to finally say, enough. But they stayed rooted to their chairs, their faces frozen like porcelain dolls. It wasn't the first time they had chosen stillness over action. Growing up, I'd often run to them crying after one of Claire's cruelties, only to be told, she doesn't mean it, or don't take it so seriously. They had rehearsed their excuses so many times that when the glass shattered, they didn't need to invent a new script. They just fell silent, letting her toast hang in the air like it was sacred. That toast wasn't just cruelty, it was a performance, a declaration of dominance. And maybe the most twisted part of it all was how calm she looked, like she had been waiting her whole life for that moment. She lifted her glass as if nothing in the room was broken, least of all me, and in her eyes, I saw not just triumph, but something deeper, satisfaction. It was as if every dig, every joke, every smirk had been building to this single gesture, and she relished the silence that followed. She relished the fact that no one stopped her. Afterward, when I excused myself to the bathroom, blood dripping into the sink, I stared at my reflection and almost didn't recognize myself. My lips were swollen. Shards of enamel clung to the pink froth in the basin, and behind the physical damage was a girl who looked like she had finally understood something she'd been denying for years. I wasn't just Claire's victim. I was the family's sacrifice. My pain was the price they were willing to pay for peace. And once you realize you've been chosen as the offering, you can never unsee it. I thought about leaving that night. I thought about walking out the door and never looking back. But trauma has a way of chaining you to the very place that destroys you. I dried my face, covered my mouth with trembling hands, and returned to the table. Nobody mentioned what had happened. My father poured himself more whiskey. My mother asked if anyone wanted pie, and Claire leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine like a queen at her throne. It was surreal, like stepping into a play where everyone had decided to rewrite the script mid-performance, and I was the only one who hadn't been told. Sitting there, half broken, I realized that families aren't destroyed by a single act of violence. They're destroyed by the years of silence that allow violence to bloom unchecked. That night wasn't the beginning. It was the climax. And as I chewed pie with broken teeth, pretending the sweetness didn't sting, I knew the story wasn't over. Something bigger was brewing beneath Claire's toast, something darker than even her cruelty. Because when she raised her glass and smirked at me, it wasn't just to mock my pain. It was to announce the truth she was about to reveal, a truth that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. When Claire lifted her glass, the words, "to family," weren't the end of her cruelty. They were the prelude. I watched her eyes scan the table, daring anyone to break the silence. No one moved, no one spoke. The tension was unbearable, and I thought she would simply smirk and sit down. But then she leaned forward, her glass still raised, and said, "Of course, not all of us really belong here, do we?" Her voice was calm, almost playful, but it sliced through me sharper than the bottle ever could. The room shifted, eyes darting between her and me, and my heart pounded so loudly I thought everyone could hear. At first I thought she was making another cruel joke, another attempt to humiliate me in front of everyone. But the way my mother's hands trembled, her fork clattering against the plate, told me this wasn't just teasing. This was truth. My father cleared his throat, opening his mouth as if to stop her. But Claire only smiled wider, sipping her wine like she had been waiting her whole life for this. "Tell her," she said, turning her gaze toward our parents. Or should I? That was when I knew. There was something I wasn't supposed to know, something that had been hidden from me my entire life, and Claire had just pulled it into the light. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. My father gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. The silence stretched, suffocating me, until finally Claire set her glass down and laughed. "She has no idea, does she? She's been sitting here thinking she's one of us, when the truth is, she's not even Dad's daughter." The words hit me like another blow, harder than the bottle, harder than anything she'd ever said. My world tilted, the ground beneath me collapsing. I stared at my father, desperate for denial, for reassurance, for anything that would make her lie. But his silence told me everything. It's strange how your life can unravel in a single sentence. One moment, you're anchored in the certainty of who you are, and the next, you're adrift in a storm of questions. My teeth throbbed, my mouth ached, but none of it compared to the hollow ache opening inside my chest. Was it true? Had my entire life been built on a lie? My father's eyes avoided mine, fixed on the table as though staring at the grain of wood could erase the truth. My mother whispered something under her breath, but I couldn't hear. Claire leaned back, triumphant, savoring every second of my unraveling. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "Is it true?" My question hung in the air, fragile and desperate. My mother finally looked at me, her lips trembling, and said, "Sweetheart," but she couldn't finish. That single word was confirmation enough. My stomach twisted, my head spinning. I had never felt so detached from myself, as though the girl sitting at the table bleeding and shaking wasn't me at all, but a stranger watching from the corner. Claire didn't stop there. She never stopped when she had the upper hand. "You see, darling sister," she said with venom, "you've always wondered why you were treated differently, why nothing you did was ever enough. It's because you don't carry his blood. You don't belong to him. You don't belong here." Each word drove deeper into my heart. I looked around, searching for someone, anyone, to refute her, to defend me, but no one spoke. The silence was worse than her cruelty. It was agreement. Memories flashed in my mind, moments I had dismissed as paranoia. The way my father sometimes looked at me with a distance in his eyes, the way relatives would occasionally comment that I didn't look like him. the way my mother would change the subject whenever the topic of family resemblance came up. I had explained it all away, convinced myself it was nothing. But now, those memories lined up like puzzle pieces, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Claire hadn't just broken me with a bottle. She had broken my identity. The air grew heavier as no one dared to move. My father finally whispered, "It doesn't matter. You're still my daughter." But even in his voice, I heard hesitation, guilt, and shame. Claire pounced on it instantly. "Still your daughter?" she repeated, laughing. "She's not your daughter at all. She's someone else's mistake you decided to raise." And I, unfortunately, got stuck with her. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. My body ached, not just from injury, but from the weight of betrayal. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the floor like a scream. "How long have you been lying to me?" I demanded, my voice shaking. My mother's sobs grew louder, but no answer came. My father lowered his gaze, his silence louder than words. And Claire just smiled, sipping her wine as though she had finally won the game she'd been playing since we were children. That smile burned into me more than anything else. It wasn't just satisfaction. It was victory. As I stood there, trembling and broken, I realized the bottle was never the real weapon. The truth was, Claire had waited until that moment, until she had an audience, until she could strike and leave me with nothing, not even the certainty of who I was. The blood on my lips was temporary. The wound she left inside me would never heal. And in that moment, with everyone frozen around the table, I understood something terrifying. The toast wasn't just a toast. It was a warning. And the secret she had unleashed was only the beginning of what she planned to reveal. The room spun as I stood there, the secret echoing in my head like a relentless drum. My father's silence was confirmation enough, but still I craved words, something solid I could hold on to in the storm. "Tell me she's lying," I begged, my voice cracking. My mother shook her head, her hands trembling as if she were holding invisible weights. "I wanted to protect you," she whispered, her words soaked in guilt. That single sentence shattered whatever fragments of certainty I had left. Protect me? By building my life on lies? By letting Claire hold the truth like a blade, ready to strike whenever she pleased? My chest tightened until breathing felt like swallowing glass. Claire leaned forward, resting her chin on her palm, watching me with predator's satisfaction. "See, I did you a favor," she said lightly. "Better to know the truth now than spend your whole life living in someone else's fantasy." Her voice dripped with cruelty, and the way she twisted her words made me want to scream. This wasn't a favor. This was a calculated attack, designed to tear me apart in front of the very people who should have been my refuge. I could feel her eyes devouring my pain, feeding off every tremble of my hands, every tear that slipped past my control. I turned to my father, desperate for some kind of anchor. "Is it true? Am I not your daughter?" My question hung in the air, sharp and heavy. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and broken. "You are my daughter," he said. "Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters." The words were meant to comfort, but instead they cut me deeper. Because "maybe not by blood" confirmed everything. My life, my identity, every memory I thought was mine, had just been rewritten in a single phrase. I stumbled back into my chair, numb and shaking. The taste of iron still lingered in my mouth, but the wound inside me throbbed worse than the one on my lips. I looked at my mother, hoping she would soften the blow, but her face was twisted with guilt. "I wanted to tell you," she said through tears, "so many times, but your father begged me not to. He thought it would change nothing." I let out a bitter laugh, though nothing about it felt funny. "Change nothing? Do I look unchanged to you?" My voice rose, raw and furious. Years of silence, years of being dismissed, boiled over until I couldn't contain them anymore. Claire clapped her hands once, slowly, mocking. "Bravo," she said, her grin wide. "Now the real show begins." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, as though the truth she had revealed was just the first act. I realized then that she wasn't done. The satisfaction in her eyes wasn't from the secret itself, but from knowing there was more. More lies, more wounds, more destruction she had stored away for this perfect stage. The bottle was her opening act. The secret about my father was the second, and whatever she had planned next was still waiting in the shadows. The rest of the family sat frozen, unwilling or unable to intervene. My father poured himself another glass of whiskey, his hands shaking, while my mother wiped her tears with trembling fingers. The clinking of ice in his glass was the only sound, and it rang louder than any words. Their silence wasn't just cowardice, it was complicity. By letting Claire speak, by refusing to stop her, they had handed her the power to dictate our story, and she wielded it like a weapon. I realized then that the truth had been buried not by accident, but by choice. My entire family had chosen silence over honesty, and Claire had chosen cruelty over compassion. The walls of the dining room seemed to close in on me. The twinkling Christmas lights, the golden plates, the roasted turkey, all of it mocked the illusion of warmth. I couldn't reconcile the setting with the chaos unraveling inside me. Christmas wasn't supposed to look like this. Families weren't supposed to act like this. But then again, maybe mine always had. The facade had just finally cracked wide enough for me to see the rot underneath. The lies weren't new. Only my awareness was. I stared at Claire, hatred burning through my tears. Why tonight? Why now? I demanded. She tilted her head, her grin never faltering. Because secrets don't stay buried forever, she said, and because you were never strong enough to hear it before. Tonight, you finally broke enough to listen. Her words slithered into me, coiling around the raw wound in my chest. She had waited for me to be at my weakest, bleeding and vulnerable before delivering the final blow. It wasn't coincidence, it was strategy. Claire had orchestrated the perfect destruction, and I had walked straight into it. The rest of the dinner blurred into fragments. My mother begged me to sit, to eat, to not let this ruin Christmas. As if the holiday spirit could plaster over shattered truths. My father stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the bottom of his glass. And Claire, she thrived. Every sigh I made, every tear I failed to hide, fed her more. She raised her glass again, mockingly repeating, "To family," each time the silence stretched too long. Each repetition twisted the knife deeper, until I could barely stand to breathe the same air as her. But even in the middle of my devastation, one thought began to take root. Claire wouldn't have revealed something this massive without reason. She didn't do things for justice or honesty, she did them for control, which meant if she had chosen this moment, this night, this table, then it wasn't just about humiliating me. It was about something bigger, something I hadn't yet uncovered. The secret about my father was only the beginning. There was more buried in this family, and Claire held the match ready to set the rest of it on fire. The weight of the night pressed down on me until I felt hollow, like a shell barely holding together. I thought the worst was over once Claire revealed the truth about my father, but the glimmer in her eyes told me otherwise. She wasn't satisfied yet. Her cruelty always had layers, and I could sense there was another one waiting to be peeled back. I sat at the table, trembling, forcing myself to breathe, trying to cling to whatever fragments of identity I still had left. But Claire's smirk reminded me that I wasn't done bleeding. She had saved something even darker, for this exact moment. She swirled the wine in her glass, watching me the way a cat watches a mouse before the kill. "Do you want to know who your real father is?" she asked suddenly, her voice light, almost playful. The question struck me like lightning. My mother gasped, shaking her head furiously, whispering, "Claire, please don't." My father slammed his fist against the table, the plates rattling. "Enough!" he barked, his voice shaking with rage and fear. But Claire only laughed, leaning back in her chair. "What's the point of hiding it now?" she said. "She deserves to know. In fact, she needs to know." My throat went dry. Part of me didn't want the answer, didn't want another truth that could rip me apart. But another part of me, the part that had already been shattered, craved it. If my life was going to be dismantled, then I wanted to see every piece. "Tell me," I said, my voice breaking. My mother reached for my hand, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't listen to her," she begged. But her desperation was confirmation enough. There was something real, something terrible, hidden in Claire's words. Claire leaned forward, her voice dropping lower, savoring each syllable. "Your father," she said, pausing just long enough to make the silence unbearable. Is Uncle James. The words tore through the room like a bomb. My vision blurred, my stomach churned, and I thought I might collapse. Uncle James, my father's younger brother. The man who sat at our table every holiday, who ruffled my hair when I was little, who gave me birthday cards with crisp bills tucked inside. The man I had trusted like family because I thought that's all he was. My chest caved as the realization sank in. He wasn't just my uncle. He was my father. The room erupted into chaos. My mother sobbed uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking, while my father stood, his face red with fury, shouting words I couldn't process. Claire only smiled wider, watching the destruction unfold as if it were a performance she had written herself. My body felt heavy, frozen, but my mind raced through every memory of Uncle James. The way he looked at my mother sometimes when he thought no one noticed, the awkward silences between him and my father, the lingering tension I had never been able to explain. Suddenly it all made sense, and the truth made me sick. I stumbled to my feet, clutching the edge of the table for balance. "Is it true?" I demanded, my voice raw. My mother's cries were answer enough, but I needed the words. I turned to my father, the man who had raised me, the man I had loved as my own. His eyes were glassy, filled with pain, but he didn't deny it. He couldn't. The silence between us confirmed everything. My legs felt weak, my chest tight, and yet beneath the devastation was a flicker of rage. Not just at Claire, but at them. At all of them. For building my life on lies, for letting me grow up in ignorance, for choosing silence over honesty again and again. Claire raised her glass once more, mocking the moment. "To James," she said, her voice dripping with venom. My father lunged at her, slamming his hand on the table, but Claire didn't flinch. She reveled in the chaos, in the destruction she had orchestrated. My mother screamed at her to stop, but it was too late. The truth was already loose, crawling through every corner of the room, reshaping everything we thought we knew. There was no stuffing it back into the shadows. My family had just imploded in front of a Christmas tree, under the glow of twinkling lights, with the smell of turkey still hanging in the air. And yet, as broken as I was, something inside me began to harden. For the first time in my life, I realized that silence was no longer an option. I had lived in the shadows of secrets and cruelty for too long, and it had cost me everything. My teeth, my trust, my sense of self, all shattered because I had been too afraid to speak. But fear was no longer my master. Not after tonight. Claire thought she had destroyed me, but in a way, she had done the opposite. By ripping away the lies, she had forced me to see the truth of who I was. Someone who had survived her cruelty, survived betrayal, survived the unbearable. I wiped the blood from my lips, stood tall, and looked her in the eye. "You don't get to define me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. For the first time, Claire's smile faltered, just slightly, but enough for me to see it. My parents stared at me, broken, ashamed, but I didn't need them anymore. I had spent my whole life waiting for their protection, their validation, and all I had received was silence. Now I knew I would have to find strength elsewhere, in myself. And maybe, just maybe, that realization was the first real gift of the night. But even as I claimed that sliver of strength, I knew this story wasn't over. Families don't disintegrate in one night without leaving ashes that follow you forever. Uncle James wasn't at the table, but his absence suddenly screamed louder than anyone's presence. If Claire had chosen tonight to expose this secret, then it meant there was more. More history, more betrayals, more truths still waiting in the dark. And though I didn't know how, I understood that facing them would be the only way I could ever reclaim myself. Christmas dinner ended that night, but the echoes of it never left me. I walked out of my parents' house with blood on my lips, betrayal in my chest, and the kind of silence that follows you long after the shouting stops. The night air was cold, sharp against my face, but it was the first breath of freedom I had taken in years. Behind me, the house still glowed with its festive lights, a cruel reminder of the illusion we had tried to protect. But inside, I knew the truth had finally broken free. For days afterward, I replayed every second in my mind. Claire's smirk, my mother's tears, my father's silence, and each time it hurt just as much as the moment it happened. But somewhere in the middle of that pain, I began to understand something I had never allowed myself to believe before. Family isn't about blood, or secrets, or the stories we're forced to swallow. It's about the choices we make, the people we protect, the honesty we uphold when lies would be easier. Claire thought she had destroyed me, but what she really did was strip away every illusion, every fragile excuse, until all that remained was the raw truth and the strength I never knew I had. I won't lie and say I've forgiven her, or that the wounds have healed. They haven't. Some nights I still wake up with the sound of shattering glass in my ears, my hand flying to my mouth as if the teeth might break all over again. But I've learned that survival isn't about pretending it didn't happen. Survival is about standing in the wreckage and saying, I'm still here, and I am. I'm here, stronger than I ever was, no longer silenced by secrets or paralyzed by fear. My story is messy, painful, and unfinished, but it's mine, and taking ownership of it is the first step toward healing. If you've ever been broken by someone you trusted, if you've ever sat in silence while your world collapsed around you, know that you are not alone. We can survive betrayal. We can outlive cruelty. We can reclaim ourselves even when everything we thought we knew has been stolen. Thank you for staying with me through this story, for listening to the truth I once thought I had to carry alone. And if my voice reached you in any way tonight, if you felt even a spark of recognition in my pain or my strength, I ask you from the bottom of my heart, subscribe to this channel. Because together we can create a space where silence is broken, where stories like mine are told, and where survival is no longer something we do alone in the dark.